And that's probably why so many of us are freaking out about AI because we have a sense that we might be on the chopping block.
Welcome to the Deeks.ai podcast, where Wake Forest innovators unpack the real-world magic of artificial intelligence through candid conversations. I'm Michael Ferrari.
I'm Ryan Scholl.
Please join us as we explore how artificial intelligence is transforming work across campus, one fascinating story at a time. Will artificial intelligence take over six-figure white-collar jobs, or just make us wildly more productive? Wake Forest economics professor Andre Mouton describes what patent data actually reveals about the future of work. From running open source models directly on his desktop to teaching students how to manage digital assistants instead of letting them write their code, Andre offers a grounded, data-backed look at why high-wage professions are changing and why the robot takeover narrative misses the mark.
This is the Deeks.ai podcast, still the #1 higher education artificial intelligence podcast at Wake Forest University. We're here today with economics professor Andre Mouton. He has a core focus in evaluating labor market exposure to emerging technologies. So without a big lead-in, I'd like you, Andre, please, if you wouldn't mind, welcome to the show. And if you would talk a little bit about your research on economics and emerging technologies.
Sure. So my research is, I guess you could say it's AI related in two ways. So one, I study technological change and its impact on labor markets, which, I mean, these days that basically means AI. And I also use AI a fair bit for my research. And if we have time, maybe we'll talk about that. But yeah, so I spend a lot of time with AI, thinking about AI, and teaching students about AI.
And you base a lot of your research in actual data, correct?
That's right.
Now, when I was doing some my own research on your research, I noticed that your research indicates that exposure to AI is concentrated a lot on the high earning occupations.
That's right.
Now, traditionally, the historic narrative has been that automation and everything has shifted low income occupations. So how does that change the narrative now that the robot overlords aren't going to take over the low income, but more of the high income?
Right. So my research does find that, and this is based off of, like we said, I tend to work with data, and so the data I work with for that research is patents. So using patent data to try to get a sense of where AI is being used, what types of work AI related inventions are being used to perform. And so that's right. That's exactly right. So in my research, I find that it's seems to be primarily targeted or used for types of work that we would associate with high earning professions. And that's, by the way, not all of that. It's not that unique or all that novel, because we have other measures of AI exposure that also agree with that. And so if you look at some of the work that Anthropic has published, they also argue that it's more of a high wage job impact. And that's probably why so many of us are freaking out about AI because we have a sense that we might be on the chopping block. But with that being said, that doesn't necessarily mean that that knowing which jobs are affected doesn't necessarily tell us how those jobs are affected, right? And so that's kind of a key challenge on the economic side is that, technology, even if we know that it really impacts a particular job, we don't know that it's going to make that job. We don't know what it's going to do to employment or wages simply from the fact that it's affecting the job. There's more to it than that. And so filling out that economic side of, what does this actually mean? Is it complementing us or substituting us? That's a really big challenge, and it's also something I try to tackle in my
I
research.
like how you just said complementing us or substituting us, because I'm curious that in the media, the storyline is always about substituting. It's
Right.
always about job replacement rather than enablement. Always leans toward fear rather than excitement. Why do you think that is?
That's exactly right. Well, this is the age-old narrative, right? If you go back to the Industrial Revolution, the apocryphal Luddite movement. I mean, the idea there was that these machines are replacing us, and of course, historically, that was not true. Employment in textiles, for example, in the 200 years ago, it was boosted by the Industrial Revolution because even though a big part of the job of making cloth, making clothes was effectively automated by machines, the demand more than increased to offset. So, as clothes became cheaper, people wanted more clothing. Wardrobes expanded, closets grew, as we know. And so it's, the step from my job is affected to, I'm going to lose my job is a really big one, and that's where a lot of economics comes into play. Yeah.
A lot of the pundits on TV talk about the K-shaped economy. Do you believe that artificial intelligence is enabling the higher end, the one percenters to thrive while the lower skilled laborers are getting pushed out? Or do you think it's actually democratizing the economy?
That's a good question. So on the one hand, we do have some evidence that from case studies that AI can bridge skill gaps. So, individuals who are maybe new to the job, entry level workers, people who lack the experience and training of some of their older colleagues, it seems to help to better allow them to handle some of the challenges they encounter in the job. So in that respect, it may be more of it may be a force that in fact equalizes um, some of these differences in the workplace. It may sort of bring less skilled workers up to speed, or maybe allow people to perform a job that used to require more formal education. Right? That would be, in a lot of ways, that would be a really fantastic outcome, because the bottleneck in the information age so far has been human capital. It's been education and um, getting workers sufficiently educated that they can make use of these technologies. So if AI is different in that respect, that would be great. On the other hand, you do hear a lot of stories about this sort of right tail of workers who use AI like crazy, and they amass massive bills for their employers.
Mhm.
There are competitions for running up token counts. So there are a lot of stories about that, and I guess it's too early to know whether any of that translates into these individuals being massively productive or superstars or anything like that.
You said something, series of words there that triggered me a bit. You said like if AI is different. I'm curious, are you seeing anything or know of anything showing that AI truly is different than some recent, major changes that have impacted, the workforce, whether it's self-checkout at stores,
Right.
kiosks at fast food restaurants, what Uber and Lyft did to taxis, I feel like there's endless examples. Like, is there actually anything truly different about AI based on what you know?
Well, I think if I were a coder, I might say, yeah, it's really different, because clearly in that domain, it's doing something that seems very disruptive and very new. What I would say is based on what I see in the data that I work with, this has been a lot more gradual than you would expect. So even if we just look at some of the innovative or patenting activity just related to generative AI, so these are just um, patents that describe a technology it's involving some kind of an artificial intelligence that's creating something.
Mhm.
It's creating some sort of data or textual output. What you see is that this is not a 2023 thing or even a 2022 thing. You start to see a lot of this in the 2010s. It's been a much more of a gradual climb, and so I think there's a very good argument to be made that this is more of a gradual transition. I mean, this is just what information technology is these days, and it's been a gradual transition from tech 1.0 or 2.0, or however you want to categorize it, to where we are today. So I think in that respect, we probably do overplay how disruptive it is, even allowing for specific domains like coding, where it really does seem to be fundamentally changing the way that people work, very quickly.
I want to hit on two, which I'm going to call opposing points that you said that are just butting against each other. You've used the word stories, and then you're talking about data. And if you look at the polls and the studies out there, everybody and their brother are doing them, from academic institutions to think tanks. you hear about one-person unicorns, and then you hear about a CEO tweeting at 2 a.m. that there's job loss. As you said, every coder has a $2,000 token budget per month, and so the narratives are all over the place. But you're trying to base a lot of your research in data and context. Talk to us a little bit about putting that research in context rather than following every headline.
Yeah. I think you're picking up this just the contrast between what we see when we look backwards and what we can imagine when we look forwards. And so the data and there are a lot of different types of data that people are working with now. I'm working with patents. Some folks are studying prompts and looking at how people actually interact with ChatGPT or other AIs. The data is very constraining, right? It tells you what people have been doing, and of course that's a very narrow focus. I think to be fair to all of the narratives, I mean some of it may just be, we like to talk
Hmm.
as we as
Yeah.
we as we know we're here talking,
I
but
mean, Wake Forest gave Michael and I a microphone, so
yeah, exactly. I talk to my students all the time, and I often make claims to them that maybe I wouldn't make to to some of my
yeah.
colleagues. But in defense of that, I think we live in a moment where there really does seem to be a lot of possibilities for how AI could go, and of course there are a lot of debates right now about which ways it should go, and you know how we should influence that as a society or so on. I think there's a sense of the possibilities here, and that's not necessarily a bad thing or even a wrong thing. But I mean, we also probably have to assume that in 5 years' time, a lot of these narratives are going to be um, they're not going to look as they're not going to look as great as they do here in 2026. So I think there's kind of a natural tension there.
Let me touch on something that you said.
Sure.
You've put out a whole slew of papers lately, and a lot of them focus on data out of Germany.
Mhm.
And you study the past job market, labor market data.
Right.
Why is Germany such a great use case for that?
Well, the answer to that is kind of a sad one, and it's that data for U.S. labor markets in a lot of respects it's difficult to get. We have the public data, which is actually very high quality relative to most countries, and there's a lot of it. But then if you actually want to get hands-on with really detailed data, so data that is more at the firm level or the person level, sometimes it's easier to go to other countries. And so the
Mhm.
Germans are fantastic at record at record keeping, and um, the German economy is also very similar to the U.S. economy, and so that makes Germany a nice sort of reference case. Their economy is comparable to ours, and in some respects, it's easier to study than ours. And it's also, I would add, like other European economies, they move a little bit slower than we do here, and that can also help with um, picking out particular economic relationships without all the noise and chaos of the U.S. economy and the U.S. labor market.
Earlier, you touched on some of the research you're doing with the patent office. Tell us about how you're using a small language model to compare some of those patents.
Sure. So this is in this project, the idea is to use patents as a way of measuring something we would really like to see, but we don't see, which is, where is AI being used, or where is any technology being used? So the idea here is a bit broader than AI. Um, Patents are a bit imperfect, right? They're only going to tell us about, where in what cases people have bothered to write a long document and go to the expense of submitting it to the U.S. Patent and Trade Office. And obviously for AI, there's not all AI uses are patented, right? We all use ChatGPT or Claude, and we're not patenting our prompts, which would be a lot of unnecessary effort. Let me tell you.
That's we had an episode with the law professor trying to discuss what the patent office is doing with AI, and that's just a mess right now.
Their job just got a lot harder.
Yes, it did.
So I'm using patents as a way to try to figure out what are the use cases for AI, and then to try to map those into what are the use cases for humans and look for the overlap. And so one side of that equation is the patents themselves. And so I look at patent applications, and these are relatively current. So they're published 18 months after, eh, by law, supposedly at the latest 18 months after being filed. And comparing these patents, which describe what the invention does, with data that we have also from the US government on occupational tasks. And so for economists, one of the tasks might be, present to policymakers about economic forecasts or something like that. And so the idea is to find patents that describe a kind of work that the technology is going to do that lines up with the work being described in these occupational task statements. And so the challenge there is that there are a lot of patents. There are also a lot of occupational tasks. And so if you were just going to compare them one by one, you end up with basically billions and billions of comparisons. And so this is something that I don't have the time to do, even if I hired all of the undergrads at Wake to help me do it. And so I use a small language model to do this sort of heavy lifting. You can't use ChatGPT, obviously, because that would be a lot of tokens. And here at Wake, we're not being compensated or rewarded for inflating our token count. So I use a small language model, and before the podcast, we were talking briefly about this current debate between open and closed source models. I'm actually using an open source Chinese model
And
called Twin 3.
is it something you've downloaded? Are you using a
Yeah.
local copy?
Yes, that's right. It is. So it is open source. It is locally hosted. So I want to say it's 600. It runs locally on your computer.
Are you doing this on a laptop or a server?
I'm doing it on a desktop, but I've also run it on my laptop. So it's
a model that's small enough. It's so small it's personal powered.
That's right. It's personal powered. As far as I know, there's no backdoor to to other countries or security concerns.
Okay, well, we are going to wade into this water now because I'm fascinated with these open models because one of the big debates now, you timestamped us. You said the date, because now on the ether there's a big debate over open weight models and should they be used. And one of the more positive uses is for researchers.
Right.
And you are shining an example right now that for our academic universities, using an open model to research. This enables research that you could not do if you were trying to go to Claude or OpenAI, Anthropic or OpenAI, and pay in Fable token costs or GPT, Soul, whatever number we're on now.
Absolutely.
But by using an open model, you can do higher level research.
So yeah, there are a few advantages to it. So one is just that a lot of these smaller language models that do run locally, they are open source because you're downloading the thing. It would be hard for OpenAI to have a proprietary AI that they're letting people just download and host on their machines. The other aspect though of it that's really important for research is transparency and replicability. And having an open source model means that you can transfer it. And one thing I'm doing in my research is I'm fine tuning the model, and so I'm changing the weights on the model. So
how are you doing that?
To describe it in brief, since I'm using a small language model to match these patents and tasks, and the small language model isn't as capable as the big language models that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. I'm using a big language model to create some training data that I then train the small language model on. So trying to narrow that performance gap between.
Basically, to put it in very simplistic terms, a small language model has less data, less weights in it, and you're adding your own data to augment what it's missing.
In a way, or you could say I'm now an educator of AIs in addition to being an educator of, and I'm educating this small language model by teaching.
Has your salary been doubled?
No, I should make that case though. In this case, I would say I'm educating this small language model about what I'm trying to get it to find when it's comparing these texts. And so the result of that is that at the end of the day, I have a new language model. And so
Specifically trained to what you want.
specifically trained to the tasks that I'm having it do. And so being able to then share that language model is important for replicability so that others can replicate my work. But also, just having literally just the permissions. I mean, so this Quinn 3 is under if memory serves, it's an MIT license. It's an open source license, and so there are no restrictions. These models can be fine-tuned, and then they can be disseminated without getting permission from from the original developer. So it gives us, I think, more of the transparency and also more of the version control. Because if you use Claude, for example, in a research capacity, in 6 months the models are going to be different, and so not only um, yeah so anyone tries to replicate your work, they're going to be using a different model, they're going to get different results, and it just kind of shoots that whole transparency process in the foot. So I think open source is really critical for any kind of a research context.
I think that's a fascinating topic just because of the headlines of the day and the big debate about open and closed and the US versus China,
Right.
all that stuff. So I think that's very very interesting how we had a real world tale of somebody using it for research. So
Right.
thank you.
And I'll just add to that um I would gladly use a non-Chinese model.
Mhm.
Not that I have any, I would say I don't have any particular preference. But the fact is, even in this domain of small language models, the open source ones
Cool. But
tend to be Chinese. So
the Chinese are killing it in the
they're
open source world.
well,
They are the leaders in the open source world.
they have something to prove, I think.
Mhm.
Whereas OpenAI, Anthropic, they have no incentive to release a small open source model. Google does have some,
Mhm.
but they also have more restrictive licenses on them because they want to exercise some control over how these models are used. And that, not that there's anything wrong with that. And of course, we have Anthropic saying right now that exercising control over the models is important. That's
Mhm.
his whole thesis. But for a researcher, that's a problem because that means that you no longer have control over this thing that's now an input to your research, and that you need to have control over if you want people to be able to replicate it freely. So, yeah.
Do you think small models could offer any kind of like solution of sorts for AI use in the classroom by offering kind of a good tool, but maybe whatever that say that educator or professor would want them to be able to get? Like, does that make sense? The scale that they
Yeah.
can get help with? I
So,
worded that poorly. I'm sorry.
yeah, how dare you?
You didn't run that through AI.
So the limit, so that these small language models, they're really good at some things. So if you give them some text, this Quinn 3 model that I'm using is really surprisingly good at understanding in basic terms what's going on in that text.
Yeah.
In terms of writing responses and actually interacting with you, that's where the small models kind of fall apart a bit. So
Yeah.
these are not really generative models in the sense
Mhm.
of you give them a prompt, and then they're going to give you
They're
an
not built to
intelligible
be like a
response.
chatbot best friend.
It's not a chatbot best
Yeah.
friend, right?
It's built to do work.
It's built to do work. I That being said, I haven't looked. I think obviously there are smaller versions of the big generative AIs, and so I haven't looked that much into that. I do for my class I did using AI. I built a little language model trainer, and so it's the most basic thing imaginable. It trains a really tiny language model on Dr. Seuss, the Dr. Seuss collected works, just to show that even in small packages you can sort of see what a language model is and what training
Yeah.
does, and how it gets better and better over time. And so in that case, you give it a prompt, and then it will give you, once you train it enough, it will give you a rhyming Dr. Seuss sounding response. So, in that respect, I am using small language models in the class. But honestly, the big language models are better for a lot of the use cases for my students, which would be getting help on concepts, developing a research plan, things like that.
One of your papers, oh well, actually a couple of them, you talk about, let's call it jobs being bundles of tasks, multitask bundles. And that matches up, I think, nicely with some of the Anthropic data you were talking about,
Right.
especially a graph they put out in March, the capabilities overhang graph. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? It talks
Right.
about
Yes.
what AI can actually do, but then what people are using it for. And what's interesting is the capabilities of artificial intelligence are way exceed what the current, and I believe this was US data,
Right.
what the current US economy is using AI to do. So it says that we can do so much more. We can be so
Right.
much more powerful with the help of AI. Is there any way to see that in the data that you're looking at? Like the capabilities and the future of the possibilities of what we can achieve?
Yeah. Let me see if I can break that down a bit. So yeah. So I think the bundling, and in a way, I want to go back to Michael's example about the self checkout phenomenon. In a lot of ways, the this question of what can a technology do is it's important, but it's also I find it less interesting because there are a lot of things that we can do that we
Mm,
don't do. Um,
that's a good
there,
point.
there are a lot of things that we can use humans for, like running a checkout line that you don't necessarily have to. And so it's not necessarily what can we do. It's what's economical to do, and
Mhm.
what are we better off leaving to a machine or to a computer, or in this case to AI. And that gets back to this to the point about bundling, um, which is also related to this point about why just because a job is affected, that doesn't tell us how it's going to be affected. It comes down to this task bundle, to kind of cement ideas we might think about coders. Right? We know that this is a job that's getting impacted, and in a lot of narratives that translates into, oh no, I'm a coder, I'm going to lose my job, because a lot of what I'm doing can be done by AI. But first of all, not everything that coders do can be done by AI. There are parts of that job that AI is still not great at, especially parts related to more the high level, managerial aspects of coding, understanding the high level goal, knowing where you want to get, being able to direct the AI to get to that point, and also being able to troubleshoot when the AI is, sending you off in the wrong direction, or going into some kind of a death spiral. So those responsibilities that I guess coders have always had are becoming more important. And it turns out that from what we can tell, the labor market for software development is actually improving at the moment. It seems to
Isn't
seems to
that
be
ironic,
seems to be
right?
recovering a bit.
The
Yeah,
the 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 best use of it, or the most advanced use of generative AI coding, but yet software developers are in more
that's right.
demand than ever.
Well, because I mean the cost of developing software just fell dramatically, right? I mean, there
Should
are
we throw out the buzzword of Javon's paradox, where as the price comes down, the more people want to consume it?
exactly. I mean, you have all these stories about, and I mean, I think this is where they say the data is the plural of anecdote. And this is where the anecdotes become kind of telling, is that a lot of what people say about vibe coding, it's not, oh, I'm doing this thing I was already doing, I'm just doing it faster. They're saying I'm doing this thing that I never would have done before because it would have taken me too long, or just been, prohibitively expensive. And so, that sounds a
Which
bit
making something for fun, I would say, in that realm is way different if then you now are looking to deploy something or sell something. And especially if you're having clients and you have to worry about security, privacy, actual
right.
legal issues, like totally different animal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right too. There as well, it seems like there are all these frontiers that AI is opening up for new types of software being developed, right? I mean,
Yeah.
all of these existing software companies now have to incorporate AI into their products. I mean, that's a body of work. It's Yeah, it seems like, the fact that these jobs were not eliminated, or have not yet been eliminated. There's still important parts of coding that are human dominated and seem like they'll be human dominated. That plus the fact that there's still a lot of demand for software,
Yeah.
um, translates into these jobs don't seem to be going away in the immediate future.
I'm curious if you see anything in the data or in your research that specifically is focused on the fact that these powerful AI tools are largely coming into the hands of already seasoned professionals who have been, doing what they do possibly for decades. And if you see any possible shift in the future when, a younger workforce comes in who didn't have that, more traditionally earned, if you want to say, expertise and are just relying wholly on these tools at all.
Right. That's an important point, I think. And I I would not say that my research gives me any special or privileged information about that, but that, you know, again, sort of apocryphally, we hear a lot
Yeah.
about fields where entry level positions seem to be getting maybe gutted a bit because these are positions typically where the work can probably be done by AI, and yeah, it's going to be flawed, but also work by entry level employees. Students being hired fresh out of Wake, they're still learning. Whatever they produce is also going to be flawed, and so, and from a short term perspective, if you're a law firm, maybe it's more economical to pay the AI, to buy some tokens than to hire a new associate. But then you lose that mentoring pipeline, and you lose those, future seasoned professionals. And so I just from what I've heard secondhand, that seems like a problem that people in these professions are trying to figure out. And I think that's just
So
a
you
bridge
try
people are
you
crossing.
you tried to skip over that point. Quickly, I'm not letting you off the hook because on
Nice.
college campuses all across the U.S. right now, the attitudes towards AI are wildly fluctuating.
Mhm.
We hear stories, and I'm going to use that term again. Stories about 96% of students are using AI, whether that's to empower or cheat. And then you have the stories of college students booing commencement speakers if just at the mere mention of artificial intelligence, and couple that with what's next for them because they're booing supposedly because they hear their jobs are going away in these
Mhm.
entry level jobs. So I'm not letting you off the hook that easily. What do you tell your students about their next step? These entry level, these junior employee type
Right.
jobs.
Right. I submit they may also be booing because we talk to them so much about AI. They may just be sick of it at this point, and who can blame them? Um, I
Is there still a space for them for entry level
I
jobs? That is.
I think absolutely. So I guess the where I do have maybe some personal data, or let's say
Hmm.
anecdotes about this, is here at Wake we hire a lot of research assistants, undergrad research assistants, to help us with our research, and so we have had innumerable discussions in the last few years about, you know research assistant versus AI. To a large extent, the work that research assistants do can be done much quicker, and in a lot of cases more effectively by AI. And so you might look at that and say, oh, this is a case where, this is by definition, an entry level kind of position. This is oftentimes the student's first experience with doing research.
Hmm.
And this is where they learn about that process and where some mentorship takes place. Um, I I would guess that we're probably hiring more RAs now, though, and it's not just because we're civic minded, although, in the economics department we're very civic minded. It's also that, I mean, we're seeing really strong complementarities there as well. An undergrad that knows how to use AI effectively is extraordinarily effective help for us in our research. And yes, we could also just interact with the AI. We could, again, we can always do what our RA is doing, but it saves us time to have the RA do it, and that's, the definition of having a research assistant. And so I
So
think
say that
that's
again, though. A research assistant who can use artificial intelligence is that much more effective.
that's exactly right. The the productivity gains that, my research assistants get from AI are just far bigger than the productivity gains that I get from using AI, because I do have some of this, legacy built-in expertise, and that, for for one thing, that makes it easier for me to kind of do research the way that I've always done it, because I've already paid this fixed cost of figuring out my approach, and the tools that I use. Um, and maybe I'm, who knows, maybe I'm just a Luddite and less adaptable than my students. But for them, knowing so little about research and having no experience with it, they tend to get lost in the responsibilities and the tasks of just doing research, and that's where AI really provides a lot of information and structure for them that that's really effective for getting them past those initial hurdles of how do I even do this research process in the first place. And so I think it's a case where we at least are seeing, it's folks who are really on that entry margin and don't have all of this human capital that are really being sort of enhanced, I guess, by bringing AI into the mix. And so what I try to tell my students is that that's their sales pitch as entering employees is if they know how to use AI and to leverage it, that makes them, that changes the employer's decision from do I hire this person versus do I just use an AI to, you know, the third option, which is hire someone who really understands how to use AI better than maybe than some of the, older workforce already in the firm or in the company. And I think that's a much more attractive sales pitch because, that really is, I think, our students' advantage is that they're young, they're flexible, they don't have all of these ingrained biases, and they don't have all of this legacy human capital that they're worried about losing. I mean, they can look at things with fresh eyes, and they can bring a certain level of AI fluency to the table that you know some of their older future colleagues may lack, and that's their comparative advantage when they go into the workforce, I think.
I also think students being more accustomed and fluent with AI, it does help them as well, where then they can offer to, a potential employer through their use of it, some of the pitfalls to using it, some of its shortcomings, and why having them be a part of that process, why that's important. Because you can actually say, like, here's the flaws that come with it.
That's exactly right. And so making sure that our students understand some of those limitations is, I think, a core responsibility for us as faculty. And I think that goes
Mhm.
back to this question about how we should think about AI on a college campus. From what I can tell, everyone is in agreement that we need to. I mean, this needs to be something that's sort of central to what we're teaching and to the coursework. But then, do we approach it from more of an enabling standpoint versus more of a precautionary standpoint? I think that's where the tension is.
Let's talk about those students and that coursework. The way we originally connected was another friend of our pod had told us that he had heard from his students about a fun course they were taking with artificial intelligence. He didn't quite know the details, so we had to do some tracking down, but originally it led us to you. And so the course that we learned about was Econ 334, The Future of Work, right? And
Right.
out of the course bulletin says it's a survey of macroeconomic trends affecting the workplace, including technological change and globalization, and then a lot more. But I'm going to let you describe this course that your students are
Right.
speaking so highly
I mean,
about.
it sounds fun, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
They must have overheard the students in either January or September because I think by May or December, I don't know how fun they think it is. I I throw a lot of data at them, and I don't think they always love that. But um, yeah, so the idea behind this course was I guess there were a few things I wanted to accomplish. One was just to broach the economics of AI and technology in the workplace, which is just obviously I find that interesting because I work on it. It's really truly a frontier area in economics because it's an area where we're thinking about the future. We're not trying to answer a question that's 50 years old or 100 years old. It's an area where there's this competition to bring in new data, new methods to try to get any kind of visibility about what's going on right now.
And this is primarily targeted to towards upperclassmen, right?
That's right. It's almost all seniors.
Which is incredibly relevant to them because their next step presumably is either going out into the workforce or potentially go to grad school too. But for them, they want to know what's next for them.
Right. And so that's sort of the carrot, I guess, is that not only is this economically interesting, I would argue it's personally relevant to these students. And so the more they understand about, the lay of the land, the better equipped they're going to be when they enter the workplace. And, on interviews, they can sound informed and bring, bring some evidence to speak to their own AI fluency, to use that phrase again. And then the kind of the third goal for this particular course is also to get students using AI hands-on, in more, maybe a more deliberate way than they're accustomed to. So I typically ask the students at the beginning of class how they've been using AI, and of course they've all been using it, but generally they've been using it as a replacement for a search engine.
Mhm.
In some cases, they've been using it as like a tutor, to cover their own gaps in knowledge, which is a fantastic use case. But for actually accomplishing tasks,
Mhm.
for this question of, you know, does AI substitute or complement us in work? When it actually comes to doing coursework, I don't know. I don't know how eager they are to talk about it, but I get the sense that they mostly attempt to use it as a substitute. They use it to do work that they would rather not do. And so my goal is to give them more of a framework for using AI as a collaborator, and to get them thinking about, when it comes to accomplishing maybe a project, or engaging in some research, or giving a presentation, and developing some slides. Try to get them to think very clearly and conceptually about, what is, as the human, what am I bringing to this? What is the necessary work that I need to do for the research or the presentation to be what it needs to be? And then what can I use the AI for, so that together we accomplish something that's
So just like what you were talking
effective,
with Michael about a coder,
right?
maybe the AI tool can produce the lines of code, but there are other tasks that a coder does that are more human.
That's
Maybe
right.
maybe that judgment call, that creativity.
That's right. And for our economics undergrads, in the past we've asked them to do a fair amount of coding, or at least to do a fair amount of work with statistical applications and other types of software that require, at least some knowledge of coding, and we don't really teach it to them, so it's not fair. And that's something that I think in our department we're all on board with. Just, if we can have that completely automated by AI, if our students don't have to write code, we're we are 100% fine with that, because that's not the core content we're trying to teach them. That's not really the core of economics. It's just one of these tasks that we've kind of had to have our students do in order to do empirical research, which of course
Mhm.
is part of economics. And so, I encourage my students in that class to not write any code themselves, but to have AI do all of the coding, and get a division of labor there, where they're telling the AI what they want, and with structure, and with, an underlying knowledge that ensures that they know what's going on, and the AI is not just a black box. But ultimately, they don't have to know, the exact coding syntax for, Stata or something like that. And so that's kind of the ideal division of labor that I think of, and that I try to encourage my students to achieve when they're completing the coursework.
So this is a course that fully calls out artificial intelligence. A lot is based on artificial intelligence. What is your AI policy for this course?
That's a good question, and it's evolving, and it should probably continue to evolve. It's not August yet, so I still have some time.
It depends when we release this.
Yeah, for the record, it's August. It's July 28th, so I have a few days until. So my AI policy for the course is, I encourage them to use it. Um, it's a fine line, right? Because I
Mhm.
I encourage them to use it, but then to be honest about how they're using it, and there's a tension there because I also tell them, and it's hard to formalize this in a syllabus, but I
Mhm.
tell them that if they automate their work, if they hand in an assignment where it's clear that they haven't done anything, and you know ChatGPT did the whole assignment, that's not going to get them a good grade. So I again, it's hard for me to give them as formal of a policy as I would like, but informally, my policy is I want them to use it, but I also want to see their proof of work. And above all, I want it to be clear from anything that they give me what they did and what the AI did. And I'm going to be judging them on on that on the choices they make about that division of labor, because ultimately, I'm a fan of this Ethan Mollick idea of, our job now is to be the managers of AI. And
Mhm.
so I want to see them doing that in in their coursework, and I give them the tools to do that. We talk about a number of approaches for using AI, and so what I what I attempt to do to sort of head off some of these issues with, did the student do it or did AI do it? Uh, One thing I attempt to do is to grade them and assess them on sort of the high level conceptual, how did I use AI, evaluate how I used AI. What did the results look like? How could they have been improved? What are some of the pitfalls I noticed? To try to get them um, to turn in at least some reflections on the process, and you know the idea there being that that's probably harder for them to get AI to do than to just answer it themselves. And then, of course, there are the usual tricks of, adding some adding white spaces to the PDF so that, the the assignment is turned out in,
Mhm.
in rhyme, or
Yeah.
other telltales to see if they're
Oh,
actually
there are some
doing it
great
themselves.
stories out in the media about professors or job seekers doing that.
People are clever.
When you do assessments in class, like exams and
Mm.
quizzes, are those with the assistance of AI, or are those more closed book, pen and paper still?
Some,
What is
right.
your
Yeah, some. And that's I think true in all of our economics courses. We're leaning maybe a little more into that now. The pencil and paper parts of the courses they've always been there for us. I mean, that's, I guess, I don't know that our students ever thought of that as being a virtue of economics,
Mhm.
but I know we are now thinking about that as being a virtue, because it makes us a lot more um robust to some of these AI cheating concerns than maybe some of the humanities, where so much of the work is done out of class, and it is generating text or generating media. So for us, the pencil and paper exams have, they're still there, and they're,
Okay,
if anything, they're becoming more important.
interesting.
And in that class, I do have some quizzes to sort of ensure that students are doing the work of learning and internalizing, some of the course concepts. But the out of class work is important, and especially if you want students to engage in research, that can't just be done in class. And so that really is the more difficult part of the course to have these sort of internal checks on, because I don't necessarily see them working on it. And so one of my solutions is to have them do more of it in class. And so
Yeah.
we dedicate a fair amount of class time to having them work on their projects in class. And I walk around and I
Can you
can.
give us an example of an assignment, whether it's in class or out of class, where a student is partnering with AI?
Yeah, so there, I give them a final project, which is something that would be hard for them to do by themselves, which is basically find and use a large scale data set. Oftentimes, this is survey data, like the current population survey, and so these are advanced data sets, you might say, to develop a hypothesis about AI or about another technology, but just some hypothesis they want to test, develop an empirical strategy. So, kind of formalize their hypothesis in some math and in a kind of metric approach. So, something sort of high level and conceptual, and then test their hypothesis using a statistical language or a stats program. And so that's a lot to ask of our undergrads. They've done that a bit usually by their senior year, but it's still a lot to ask. And so I have them lean heavily on AI to sort of fill in some of the gaps and write the code again and things like that. And so that project, they have a long runway of 2 or 3 months. And I give them a fair amount of class time to work on it. And then I can walk around and um, troubleshoot, but then also get a firsthand glimpse on how they're using AI for that. And some of the in-class exercises are also designed to sort of steer them in the right direction. And so we do a number of in-class applications that are similar to what I'm asking them to do in these on these end of semester projects, but sort of guiding them through the process of you know developing a well thought out prompt that's suitable for research, sort of using interactions with the AI to develop their own high level picture of the question they're asking and how they're going to attack it. So
Were these
yeah.
assignments that could have been done 2, 3, 4 years ago before AI hit the scene, or are these newly developed assignments that integrate artificial intelligence?
They could have been done, and this course now is 3 years old. So 3 years ago, I did have my students do similar projects. I would say the quality has gotten a lot better. We also see this with our senior thesis projects. The quality is consistently, let's just say, some of the curiosities you would have
Hmm.
seen a few years back in some of maybe the less well done papers, those are gone. So
So the output quality has gotten better. Do you think the students are learning as much?
the output quality has shifted upwards, especially for the lower end, I would say. Um, I whether the students are learning as much, it's hard to give an answer that doesn't sound negative to
Mm.
that question. In
But
the
I
in
mean
the
that's
in the
fair.
sense in
We
the
want
sense
to
that
hear.
even
We want
let
to
me
hear it.
clarify,
Yeah.
even even 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I think probably the sense was it's not clear how much students are actually learning from these
Mm.
things. That's kind of a perennial problem. We give students a task that's really hard for them to do, and they have all of these other things that they're juggling. Oftentimes what happens is they're just coming to us and asking for help. Advisors are maybe having to write code for the students, and oftentimes what we would see in thesis projects is students sort of regurgitating
Mm.
what their advisors you know suggested they do or told them to do. And so the learning process is imperfect, and it's always been imperfect. But this way they're at least maybe learning in some dimensions that are also important, and maybe for many of our students more important, which is how to use these technologies to get better results. So if they're able to get a better final output, and again, hopefully that's not just because the AI is doing the entire thing, but because there's some complementarity there. But if they're able to use it to achieve a better outcome, then that's portable across domains, and
Mhm.
that's something they can take to their future job. So at a certain point, I guess we have to let the results speak for themselves and say, if they're doing better, then we cross our fingers and we
Yeah.
say, presumably they're learning more. But it's so much of that learning process is invisible, and we don't have a way to judge it other than just by the final results. And so a really imperfect answer to a really challenging question.
Are you seeing any trends in regards to like, hey, when it's a take home assignment, student A may do a fantastic job, but then when it's in class, their grades don't kind of seem to match up?
Some we do see some of that. um I, I think for the nature of the assignments that I give, it's less of an issue because all the easy stuff, they I give them those questions in class, and they're answering
Yeah.
them on pencil and paper. And for the stuff I give them at home, I mean, there is. So in my macroeconomics class, for example, I give them homework assignments that are not for a grade, or they're for a completion grade. And so yes, I do see some cases where obviously this was done by an AI. and typically it's so obvious that I deduct points for it. Um,
But is
just
that only when you've explicitly stated not to use artificial intelligence for this
That's right. I
assignment?
explicitly tell them
Mm,
that they should not, because that's where that's their opportunity to learn. So there are cases where in some of these sort of preliminary assignments, or just really they're just for practice. In some of these assignments, they turn in homework that looks fairly good and competent, and then they don't do super well in the exam. So I do see that, but I think we also need to be cognizant in course design about not setting students up for failure, and so conveying to them what the purpose of these at-home assignments
yeah.
is, being clear about what they need to do to perform well on the in-class assignments.
Making sure the students understand those learning objectives and the
Yeah.
reasons for the assignments.
Exactly. And trying to make it, whatever hurdles we can give them to prevent them from just, automating their homework assignments, the better. And so,
Yeah.
for my for my homework assignments, I do things like have them reference course material that's, an AI is not going to know. And so I try to give them additional incentives not to lean too heavily on an AI, because they're just not going to
Yeah.
get good results. So I mean, there's an element of sort of like forcing them to not take the easy path, but that's something we have to do as educators. I think it's just
Yeah.
the nature of it.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer that AI is more powerful the more capable you are without it. Are you seeing that with students by any chance?
I What I see with, especially with some of the um it feels almost like an unfair term, but some of the better performing students, the students that really go the extra mile, and they turn in, these are the students that would have done well 5 years ago, right? So
Yeah.
I don't, my sense is that to the extent that AI has sort of jumbled up students' performance, it doesn't seem to have affected the ranking of student performance, if that makes any sense.
Gotcha.
I think it's still very easy for me as an educator to differentiate who's learning the material and who's performing well, and who's not. And what I would say is the students that really do well in my classes, I think AI is absolutely um, improving what they're able to do, and I see evidence that they're using it responsibly. These are not students that would have been trying to minimize their effort in the first place. But what I'm seeing is improvements in what they're turning in, and oftentimes they seem to go the extra mile, and to really kind of show how they're using AI, and to make it clear that they're not just minimizing their effort. And I think the fact that I see a lot of gains there, and a lot of improvement in terms of just the quality of what those students turn in, I think that's a really encouraging thing, because that tells me that there are some gains to be found from these constructive relationships with AI, and it's not just a question of the students who don't know what they're doing letting the AI do it for them. And so that makes me a bit more optimistic.
Cool.
We're going to triple your salary.
Yeah, sounds great.
So you need to leave us with some final advice.
Sounds great.
Okay.
But
You
yeah.
said you've been you are an educator of students.
Mhm.
You're an educator of small language models.
Right.
And you're also an educator of other faculty because you do lead faculty development seminars for the Center for Advancement of Teaching.
I've done that. Right.
So you give faculty advice on how to use AI for their research.
Right.
What one or two things would you like all the faculty at Wake Forest and maybe outside of Wake Forest to know about best ways to use these AI models in research?
So, right. So when I've led those workshops, it was if I guess it was 2 years ago now, at a time where I think people had less experience in general. My sense is that at Wake, a lot of the faculty are heavily engaged already, and so I think the question of where there are deficits maybe is completely different from the last time that I led a workshop. But in general, my impression is that there's still a lot of, maybe, I don't know, fear or trepidation, and so it's probably very very domain specific, right? So if you're an English faculty, it's probably, I don't know, the use cases might be a little bit a little bit more limited or problematic than if you're in the hard sciences. But for us in the hard sciences, I, I think by this point a lot of us have figured out good workflows for incorporating AI into our research. I think maybe an area where we're still figuring it out is how to incorporate it into our teaching and into classes. And I don't know. In some ways, I feel like that maybe is the more important frontier because, you know, writing another paper is important, sure, especially if you don't have tenure yet, like me. But you know, educating our students about this. I mean, these you know these this is the wave of workers, if I can call them that without offending them. This is the wave of workers that's going to have an outsized impact on how AI actually develops in the workplace. And we have an opportunity to really help them build some really valuable human capital in that process. And so incorporating AI effectively into the classroom, I think that's the challenge. And I mean, my advice would be just do it, do it, and then figure out how to improve it, because it's experiences are so idiosyncratic, and it depends on what you're teaching, and even within economics, it I think we have very different experiences depending on the subject matter, what area of econ we're teaching. But you just have to start doing it, and then you know problem solve, troubleshoot, course correct, and the important thing is that I think we're getting them to engage with AI. So kind of dodge that question too, but maybe more elegantly.
That's okay. You can answer it further the next time you come on. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And we are going to hold you accountable when we all get to the world of abundance and we don't have to work anymore. I don't know what you're going to study anymore, because there won't be any more labor force, because AIs will do it all for us and we'll be sitting on beaches, right?
Exactly. And at that point you can try to get me back on the podcast, but I'll probably be in Cuba or something.
Sounds good.
Thanks for having me.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks again to our guests, and thanks for listening to the Deeks.ai podcast. Please continue to follow the AI discussion by subscribing on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And if you have any comments, questions, or want to join the discussion, please email us at deeks.ai@wfu.edu.